So I actually originally called in to talk about immigration, but due to some of the previous callers, I actually got to thinking it would be interesting to talk about immigration and how it relates to Israel and the Gaza Strip, and just in general that whole area, because you could sort of see the kind of statism versus, I guess, tribalism or smaller groups playing out. Because the whole region, if you start in the 19th century, that whole region was under the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Turks, in some places, were very bloodthirsty because they decimated the Armenians, they killed a bunch of Greeks. But in that area, it was mostly peaceful, and nobody really wanted to have their own state. But when the Ottoman Empire was destroyed, there was this sort of vacuum there, and the British were given a mandate to sort of take the people that were living there, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and make one state. That didn't really work out. And so what we have is basically a recommendation for a partition and two different people having two different states. And what happened was basically the Jews got their state, and I suppose and this is what's interesting, the Arabs, because at that time everyone was called Palestinian, but then the Arabs basically got a nationalistic movement as well. There were a bunch of movements back then. There was like pan-Arabism, that they wanted to, belong to sort of like all Arabs. There was a thought that they could become part of Greater Syria, go back to that. And I think for the last 40, 50 years, there's this national movement. And so, my question to you is like, what necessarily is wrong with that? I see, though, that this movement on both sides is partially responsible for all the violence. Like, if the people didn't really care about having their own state, they wouldn't have this, like, militant terrorism sort of, which both groups kind of had just to build their state for themselves. That's how I see it.
So can you be more specific with the question?
Sorry. So my question is, what do you think about the role of, I guess, people's desire to have their own state in the violence that you see there?
All right, stand by. We can come back and discuss here in moments. What is the role of the desire of people to have their own state in the violence of
the Middle East,
Gaza, Israel, etc.? We'll come back with that. 855-450-FREE, and we'll try to sneak your call in here if you're already on the line. We might be able to get you on here tonight on Free Talk Live. We've got Greg on the line in New York. Now, Greg, you'd asked a question about conflict in the Middle East, specifically the Israel-Palestinian kind of conflict situation, this ongoing saga. Mm-hmm. And your question was in regards to what is the role of the desire of people to have their own state in that conflict?
Yeah, I guess my question came out very convoluted because it's a complicated topic. But what do you see as the role, sort of, because obviously the Jews want, on the Jewish side, there were opinions ranging from religious groups saying we should not have our own state and we should wait for the Messiah to come, versus Zionists that would say, yes, we should have our own state, and in fact, it should have as wide borders as possible. And on the Arab side, there was the same thing. Some Arabs wanted to just kind of be like pan-Arabism and wanted to, join with all Arabs everywhere in a religious sort of sense, perhaps, if they're Muslim. But on the other hand, some of them were national. And so my question is, this nationalistic feeling of saying, okay, we've been living on this land for a long time. We want to have our own state so we could perhaps join the international community or whatever. How much does that lead to violence, and how much is that responsible for the violence that we see there?
It's not so much the desire for self-determination that is causing violence. It is the people opposing other people's rights to self-determination that is causing the violence.
Right. And
so you're asking the question in a backwards manner, as if it's the people seeking self-determination that are causing the violence. It's the people that are opposing their self-determination that are causing the violence.
Okay, so that's kind of my question. I'm framing it that way only because since you guys stand for liberty, and you're opposed to states, I suppose. And that's sort of my question, because on the other hand, the state is sort of what the people want to have, many of them, and they kind of impose it on everyone else to have self-determination. Maybe some people don't want to be part of that state, but ultimately those people are not going to get what they want, because the state is going to be formed eventually. I guess my question is, so that's my question, sort of, are you for self-determination in terms of building a state, or against it?
Well, I'm against this. I'm against the idea of the state, period. But if the question is, should we have one state or two, I would choose two, because I'd rather have more choices available for people. And, of course, ideally, those people should be able to travel to whichever state they would like to travel to. So, for instance, people who feel persecuted around the world in whatever conflict we're talking about should be free to get the hell out of there and come here, where they could have a better life for themselves, if this were actually a free country wherein people could come here from around the world. But unfortunately, the government bureaucrats have made that as difficult and as arduous as process as they possibly could. So, I mean, there's no ideal answer to the real world situation that I think that we're confronted with. That's how I see it, at least.
I guess from my point of view, I'm not necessarily an anarchist or even a strong libertarian. I've called in before with some, I guess, liberal or minarchist views. But in my opinion, I think the shortest path at this point to prosperity for the people of Gaza would be to somehow get rid of Hamas and then once, or disarm Hamas, because if there are no weapons there, I think the international community would literally give them billions, maybe $50, $100 billion to develop their natural resources and have a tourism industry. But if Hamas,
the Israeli government has absolutely no interest in allowing the people of Gaza to exist in any form other than as subjects of the Israeli government. That's why they're dropping all of these bombs on UN-run refugee centers. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, said that it would have been a moral hazard to not bomb the refugee centers, because by not killing innocent civilians, they would have been giving aid and comfort to Hamas and strengthening Al-Qaeda.
No, I think that's a very fair point. But I think everybody would agree that if there are no terror groups in Gaza, when I say terror groups, there are no militant groups firing rockets at a neighboring country, then Israel would not have any legitimacy to go in there or bomb anyone or even cross the border at all. And
but the bombing began because of the Israeli military. The IDF initiated the bombing. The Israeli government initiated the blockade. They're the ones that put up the wall on the Gaza border. They're the ones that are preventing ships from coming in to bring food and clothing and other goods to the people of Gaza.
Greg,
but I just want to add, it's not just the Israelis. Pretty much every nation at this point is calling for Hamas to disarm. The Egyptians have a blockade. The Saudis, the UAE.
Well, sure. The Israelis have curried favor with a lot of the big countries out there, right? So, they've got all the money coming from the feds.
Hamas is, yes, but also it's because Hamas is, after all, not willing to commit to any kind of peace, long-term peace.
Well, what does that mean?
All I'm saying
when you're talking about long-term peace, what does that mean? Haven't the Israelis broken the peace accords?
The ceasefires that have been offered is for the leaders of Hamas to swear that they will disarm everybody in Gaza, while the Israeli military is allowed to still fire on civilians and
that sounds like a Holocaust.
Attack these tunnels that people are using to sneak into Israel to get food and clothing and other supplies that they need.
Also, if these people are militant radicals, then what is it going to matter if they say, we'll disarm everyone? They can't actually do that.
Right.
Greg, thanks for the call tonight. I appreciate it.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.